All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll have some folks still coming in. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our second evening of our avian bird conservation workshop. Again, I just want to thank the U.S. Embassy for sponsoring this workshop series. There's several more to come, so that we hope that you'll stay engaged. Just to kind of, as a reminder, just a little bit about the workshops. If you were not here last night, this is a collaboration between Oregon and the US and Sabah. And the main purpose behind this workshop is to collaborate between professionals in Sabah and the United States, specifically Oregon and Louisiana, Fred, to really figure out a long-term bird conservation plan in Sabah that could potentially be replicated in Sarawak and other areas. And so it's been a long relationship that we have had with Sabah over many, many years. There's the Sabah Collaborative, which has been an amazing group that has been working with the U.S. Embassy for a long time. And so the purpose behind these workshops is to really just build on this partnership and work more closely together to figure out where the gaps are in Sabah and how we can work together with our professional skills and their professional skills to really develop more sound conservation plans. So we're really glad that you're here. We have a really amazing night with some great speakers. And just as a heads up, if you did miss last night's presentations, we will be sending out an email, a follow-up email that has the video link. So you'll be able to watch last night's workshop with some really great presentations and some wonderful discussions. So I would like to introduce our first presenter, which is Yup Chin Aik. And Yup is the lead investigator and co-founder of M&S Hornbill Conservation Project. He graduated from the University of Kemuksan, I hope I did not get that wrong, Malaysia, with an MS in conservation biology. And he has been working for the Malaysian Nature Society for the past 20 years. He's currently the lead investigator, CEO, co-founder of the M&S Hornbill Conservation Project, and also the senior conservation officer and project manager in the M&S Conservation Division in the Secretariat at Kuala Lumpur. So while working for M&S, he has carried out various bird and non-bird conservation initiatives and activities involving faunal surveys and monitoring, species-specific action plans, policy and advocacy, and multilateral environmental agreements, capacity building, and CPA. Works with the Malaysian Nature Society International Partner BirdLife International on updating the status of globally threatened birds for Malaysia, which is an important bird and biodiversity areas and several regional bird-related projects. So Yup will be sharing how the Malaysian Nature Society sets priorities for bird conservation in Malaysia and also leverages M&S members and the public to help provide quantitative and qualitative monitoring and research data that help inform bird conservation efforts. So thanks for being here, and good morning to you, Yup.
Good morning. Shall I start now?
Yes, go for it.
Hi, bird-loving people. Good to see you back again. Good evening, Pacific US. And selamat pagi, Malaysia. Orang-orang Sabah, harap-harap sudah minum kopi. So, okay. So thank you for joining us again, and it's great to be part of this initiative. I think by now we all know that Sabah has amazing and wonderful birds, right? And one of the most amazing bird that you'll ever see in Sabah is this bird called the Bornean bristlehead. It looks like the head has been dunked in Cheetos sauce, actually. And this bird is probably now the most recognizable bird in Sabah because the Sabah tourism has used it quite extensively to promote birding tourism for the state. So the bristlehead is the poster boy of birds, I guess, in Sabah. But the thing about this bird is that it is not globally threatened at the moment. it's almost there. The status is near threatened, to be precise. Now, whether it remains near threatened or not remains to be seen, and depends on whether the threat will reduce the population or not in the coming years ahead. But one of the recommendations that BirdLife gave for this species after evaluating its status is that the Bornean bristlehead should be carefully monitored. So now here's the question. Who's monitoring the Bornean bristlehead at the moment? So this brings me to the talk that I will share with you today. I will give you a broad overview as to how MNS does priority setting for bird conservation in Malaysia, and how MNS has been banking on and leveraging on its volunteers to do bird conservation to obtain good data, which feeds back into bird conservation. Right? Next, please. Right. So for those who are not familiar with the organization I work with, we are called the Malaysian Nature Society. And we are very young, you see. We are established in 1940. So we are over 80 over years old as an organization, and we are still quite springy. And our mission is very simple, to promote the conservation of Malaysia's natural heritage. And under this mission, we have a secretariat based in Kuala Lumpur, and we have several divisions. We have conservation division, which I'm under at the moment, and we have education, and we also have several centers in across the country. But for the moment, most of them are in Peninsular Malaysia. And one of the unique thing as a society is that we are membership based, and we have branches in all states and region in the country. And for Sabah, we have the MNS Sabah branch, which is Kota Kinabalu, based in Kota Kinabalu, and the newest kid on the block is actually the MNS Sandakan branch. Now, where bird conservation is concerned, we MNS have been involved in this subject even in its inception. So we have built a very strong foundation in filling up knowledge gaps of birds in the country. And one of the other commitment to bird conservation that we can share is that within MNS, we also have this entity called the MNS Bird Conservation Council. So this council looks at bird conservation broadly, advises the conservation division, works with the conservation division. At the same time, they are also like the gatekeeper of bird records in Malaysia. So they evaluate bird sighting, bird records that submitted, and from there we have a bird. We produce a bird checklist for the country. And Sabah is particularly also interesting because of late, a few of the country records, new country record, comes from different sites across Sabah, and these are mostly migratory birds. Next, please. So you've seen this map yesterday in Robert's presentation, just to show that once upon a time in Sabah, many moons ago, Sabah looks very green, very shades of green, and the state has diverse habitat types, more than 20 over different habitat types, which obviously support a diverse range of bird communities and habitats. But fast forward to today, Sabah looks very different. A lot of this remaining forest has either become protected areas, or in forest concession under Robert's agency, while some quite a big patch of lowland forests have been obviously converted to different agriculture for different agriculture purposes. So in a way, I think we have lost quite a fair bit of bird populations in the past. Okay, next please. So this is just some quick statistics. It's a bit dated, but this is just to show the various habitats that we can find birds in Sabah. It has also unique habitats such as the heath forest, which we do not really find in or find in very, very small sizes in peninsular Malaysia. And majority is still dipterocarp forests, from the lowlands up to the montane, and also quite a fair bit of different kinds of wetlands. So for Sabah, if you look at the table there, that is taken from one of the MNS publications. It's a bit outdated already by now, and it's being revised. But it shows that the whole of Borneo has, I think, 600 over birds. At that time, I think it's just over 600, but by now it has gone to at least 600, perhaps 660 or so, as maybe Robert pointed out. And for connoisseurs of birds in Sabah, or students that who are interested in Sabah ornithology, I always suggest that they dig into this publication. These are the sort of like the bird Bibles of Bornean ornithology, and of course Sabah as well. And if you've not read Fred Sheldon's book, which is featured there, please do so. And for now, there are also many different kinds of field guides in the market, and quite a number of them are very high quality, like Birds of Borneo, which was published by Quentin Phillips and his collaborators. Next, please. Now, to do bird conservation, we need to see if we have the policy that supports this endeavor. Now, Malaysia as a country has its own national policy on biological diversity, which is good, which is helpful, and it's currently being reviewed. And that sets the stage, at least for the policy perspective, to support efforts in biodiversity conservation, including birds. Sabah is kind of special in my eyes, because Sabah has its own Sabah biodiversity policy. As you can see on the cover of that policy, which I shared here. If you would like to know more, the link I provided below, you can download the document and read. And in that policy, it outlines 5 different pillars, which, to my delight in a way, the first pillar talks about people. People wanting to make biodiversity conservation work in Sabah. And again, in its preamble, that is very much reiterated. And it says that it emphasizes safeguarding biodiversity is a shared concern to all the people of Sabah. This sentence is very important, because at the end of the day, we want more Sabahans to champion bird conservation in their own state. Now, this policy is going to end soon next year, and I believe they've done a review. And the review, I think, outline what has been done, what has not been done, and also taking into account what are the recent developments in conservation. For example, looking at biotech, excess benefit sharing, and biosafety, which probably was not covered during the conception of this policy in before 2012. Next, please. And one of the documents that actually support the formation of this policy, again, it is sort of like a first for Malaysia, for a state or region to have its own document, and this is called the Sabah Biodiversity Outlook. And I just draw out a simple graph here to show that they have identified what are the drivers of change for the state. It's undeniable that the population will keep on increasing, and with that, of course, there is a demand to have a better standard of living, and to have a better standard of living, obviously the economic sectors need to grow. And driving all that, we're going to have all this list of threats that will put pressure on the remaining bird population in its respective habitats. Next, please. So where MNS is concerned, we are also a partner to the larger BirdLife partnership, which has, I think, by now more than 120 NGOs partners globally. So under the BirdLife, they have this program called the Important Bird and Biodiversity Area. Now, previously it was called the Important Bird Area, but when we call it Important Bird Area, it doesn't mean that it's just only birds and we chuck away all the other biodiversity as well, like mammals and so forth. But no, this is just using birds as the flagship species in trying to promote conservation. So they have this program. This is a very, very old program, started in 1979, and it uses a set of criteria to identify IBAs. And these criteria are quite strict and has a certain level of standard. So by today, we have over 13,000 global and regional IBAs. So all those nice black shading dots that you see around the globe map that is on the slide is where all the IBAs are. So for Malaysia, MNS started getting into IBAs just before the turn of the millennium. And it took us about 7 years to finally come out with 55 IBAs in total for the country. So for Sabah, at 2007, when it was published in 2000, we have about 14 IBAs for Sabah. But currently, as in last year and this year, it is under review and being updated internally within MNS for the time being. So in that process, we're looking at 28 new candidates, IBAs, because in the first exercise, obviously, some of the important IBAs, potential IBAs, were missed out. And for Sabah, we are looking at potentially four new IBAs. Next, please. So just giving you a quick tour of the criteria. There are 4 criteria in which we need to evaluate against. The first is globally threatened species. The second is restricted range species. Those birds that has a very restricted distribution, and if I'm not mistaken, their breeding range is less than 50,000 square kilometers. So that sort of defines what it is as a restricted range species. For the third one, A3, biome restricted species. In Malaysia, we have 2 broad groups, which is the Sundaic lowland forest and the Sundaic montane forest. These classifications are all, the back end work of it is done by BirdLife. And the last one, we talk about congregations, and this, in the Malaysian perspective, it kind of looks at mostly migratory water birds and also raptors. Next, please. So here's a very quick overview of where the IBAs are. The red polygons basically shows the existing IBA in 2000 that was identified in 2007. The ones which is pin yellow are those potentially new IBAs for Sabah. And I was quite delighted to actually see, what Robert has presented. There are overlaps with the IBAs here, and it is actually good because then it provides additional layers and justification for the government why they're investing money in keeping this forest for biodiversity. So the graph here shows you the comparison between 2007, the original IBAs directory, and 2021, the recent one. And for Sabah, as I said, there's a slight increase in the number of IBAs. And the bottom one is according to habitat. So no surprise there, forest still forms a large part of many of the IBAs in Sabah, and also wetlands, mostly mangroves and probably heats from forests. So there's a list of the IBAs, if you're keen to know, I've listed there, and those in red are the ones which are being considered. And I just picked one example, which is the Imbak Canyon Conservation Area. In 2007, we didn't have a lot of information about Imbak Canyon, because at that point it was still early days for Imbak Canyon being assessed to become a conservation area. So from 2007 and now, more than 10 years, there's a lot of information that has come in, by the resurveys and so forth. So we are able at least to make that kind of assessment and to propose it as a proposed IBA. And this effort, the input that we get from Sabah comes from our branch, the M&S Sabah branch. Next, please. So some statistics again. Again, comparison between 2007 in blue to 2021 in orange. In 2007, there are only so many globally threatened birds, but many years have passed, and you can see that the number of globally threatened birds within the Sabah context, it has gone up more. So there are 18 IBAs out of that 18 IBAs that has globally threatened species, which means in this case, almost all IBAs in Sabah, whether it's existing or proposed, have globally threatened species. The second one, the A2, is the restricted range. And I think because BirdLife has revised the status, so we see more sites being supporting restricted range birds. So for A3 biomes, there's not a lot of difference. A4 also not a lot of difference, but A4 is a gap, I would say, and I will explain a bit later towards the later part of the slide. Next, please. So these are the pressures faced by Sabah IBAs, and this was actually taken in 2007, so this is a bit old. But I think having looked at the current threats right now, perhaps it is almost the same, except maybe some of the threats have perhaps accelerated. So one of the serious threat right now facing Malaysian birds, as we discussed yesterday, is the bird cage trade. So birds like greater green leaf birds, which was not in a globally threatened list, suddenly being catapulted into now either endangered or critically endangered. The oriental magpie robin, which is very common. The question is how common it is. We also don't know in the future. And of course, right now, everybody knows about the plight of the helmeted hornbill. And just yesterday, I read the news in Indonesia, they've seized quite a number of black-naped orioles, which is another common garden bird. So all birds that can sing are potentially targets for this trade. Next, please. Next, please. Thank you. So apart from facing those, go back. Sorry. Yes, thank you. So apart those threats that I listed down, one of the persistent challenge that we have is the knowledge gaps of birds in Sabah. So I just pick a few examples. The storm stork, the stronghold of storm stork is probably in Sabah. I think that's probably no question about it, because in Peninsular Malaysia, we're not getting a lot of reports of this waterbird to date. So it is important probably to assess, what numbers are we talking about, what are threats, where are the hotspots, and so on, because we do not want the storm stork to join milky stork as the next waterbird to go functionally and locally extinct. The montane birds also would require some form of attention. We've been talking about climate change, how it impacts birds. If if we can mentally recall the geography of Sabah, there's only a small part of Sabah where you have all these montane bird communities. So what's going to happen to these birds if our planet starts to heat up? Where are they going to go? How should we need to start some form of monitoring, because anything to do with climate change will require a long period before we see any potential trends. Hornbills is another group that is gaining attention. I think you'll hear more about it on Robin's work after this. The wrinkled hornbill also has been catapulted into the endangered status category. And the conventional wisdom or knowledge is that perhaps it is a bird that is tied to the peat swamp habitat. Now, again, nationally, in Malaysia, it would be good to also find out, what are we looking at, in terms of population, and what are the needs. And Kinabatangan area seem to be one of the stronghold as well for this species. So not just hornbill, not just the wrinkle, but all the other hornbills that we have in Malaysia. Obviously, we need to have a better understanding and to know where they are. So one of the examples that I can share is that the work that we do in Peninsular Malaysia, where we have already mapped out important hornbill landscape, a concept that was developed by MNS. And we have shared that with our government authorities. In Sabah, recently, our branch there has just recently concluded the study and has engaged the Sabah authorities as well. And likewise, I asked the same question for Sabah. Now, where are the important hornbill landscapes for hornbills in Sabah? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And the last one are migratory shorebirds. This is perhaps one of the questions that we have not been able to answer to date. Now, where are the important sites for migratory shorebirds in Sabah? Okay, and we have not been able to get a full picture yet to date for Sabah. So knowledge gap is still stubbornly persists, and something that we need to also pay attention at. Next, please. So as I said, migration is a big question mark. These are some of the studies that has been done by other people, other researchers, and they tag birds like the great knot for shorebirds, and the knots landed in different parts of Sabah. Are these areas important for great knots that is globally threatened, and also at the same time important as a wintering or staging sites for migratory shorebirds? That's something that we need to quickly understand. And the other map shows you the migration of the Japanese sparrowhawk, the route that they were taking, and admittedly, all these routes we don't know. In Peninsular Malaysia, it's somewhat more clear, but in the whole Borneo, including Sabah, we have no idea where these migratory raptors go. And you can see one of the bird landed somewhere near the tip of Sabah. Do they remain there all the time, or do they use it as a jumping point to go into Philippines? So migration is important, but this only tackles the shorebirds and the raptors. One big question mark also is, what about forest migrants? Is anybody looking? Is anybody doing long-term mist netting to look at forest migrants, looking at trends, looking at many aspects of what they need when they come here as a wintering site? So something to think about. Next, please. So where do we go from here? So I've just broadly listed, down some points here. So I think we need to know our priorities. So again, looking at sites, habitat, species, identifying knowledge gaps that helps in pointing out at least some form of direction. The institutional support and processes also needs to be looked at. If the Sabah government is supportive of bird conservation, what are the things that that can be done to build collaboration, to improve the processes, to make things smooth, so that people can collect information and then channel it back to the government for decision making. Consensus building and building stakeholdership is also important. As I said, this cannot be confined to just conservation NGOs and also research institutions. I think we need to get the broader community as what the policy advocated to be involved. Now, what we also learned in our process of doing bird conservation and dealing with volunteers is that the feedback loop is also important. So we do a lot of data gathering, we do research and all that kind of thing, but it would also be good for those who are involved. In this case, if you are talking about citizen science, they are not scientists, it will be good to somehow channel back the information in a simple, bite-sized, not too scientific kind of language, to let them know that your effort has resulted in this finding, therefore it can be used for such and such reason, purpose for conservation. So I think that sort of gives them a sense of involvement, a sense of pride, perhaps, that they have actually, their effort is worth something. One of the things that we seldom also think about, we think about the questions that we want to answer, we think about what we want to do and all that, is resource mobilization and management. How are we going to get the manpower? Where are we going to get the funds? How is this going to be coordinated? How much are we involving citizen scientists, for example? All these are resources that need questions that need to be pondered. Strengthening policy implementation is also key. As I showed you earlier, the Sabah's policy is being reviewed. So whatever is still a gap, obviously needs to be strengthened. And the last is invest long-term. Monitoring is not a short-term activity. Next, please. And just to show some of the activities that M&S has been doing, this is some of the citizen science-based bird conservation activities. We have monitoring water birds. Our Sabah branch has been doing a lot of, has been involved in these sensors since 2010. And now they are also doing a water bird project. So if you're interested, please contact Sabah branch. We also monitor raptors. We do garden bird counts. And also we have sort of like an Earth Watch like program to count hornbills in the project set that I'm working on right now. Next, please. Next, please. Yes. So this is just to show you some of the outputs that have resulted from all this work. The feedback loop that I mentioned, that the picture on the top left is a simple diagram to show what is the result for the My Garden Bird Watch this year. Then informations are also contained in other more technical publication and paper as well. And some of the information is used to help the government in different capacity. For example, M&S played a key role in advocating and encouraging the Malaysian government to become a party of the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. So Malaysia is a party now. At the same time, while Malaysia becomes a party, the Sarawak Forest SFC, Sarawak Forestry Corporation, and Sarawak government nominated Bako Buntal Bay as Malaysia's first flyway site. And Bako Buntal Bay is an important bird area. So perhaps Sabah could nominate the next flyway site. Who knows? Next, please. So I've come to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for inviting me to share thoughts. And we also like to thank the countless dedicated volunteers who have served the society and still continues to serve. And that picture to me shows the epitome of dedication. A volunteer that's baking under the hot sun in Tanjung Tuan, counting raptors. So when the going gets hot, the staff puts on a hoodie, shades, and just carry on. So thank you very much for listening, and let's talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Yap. Well, we went a little bit over. We have a couple minutes for questions. So we'll have one question here. We have about 4 minutes. So the IBAs are the same remaining forests, Denham, Tebben, Crocker Range, etc. These are the same places that Robert notes as important floral localities. So these designations don't seem very insightful, but obviously the best places for birds and plants are where they occur.
So I wrote that comment, and it's, again, I'm a cynic and a grumpy old guy, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the places where the plants are and where the birds are is where the forest is. And the important bird areas on Yap's map were exactly the same places where Robert noted that the forest was richest. Those are the places: Danham, Malleau, Tobin, Crocker Range, where the forest exists. So I, in my cynical and grumpy way, just don't understand why it's even important to say these are important bird areas. Obviously, they're important bird areas. Do you have a response to that? I've always been irritated by important.
Yes, I do. First, I will have to say that we need grumpy old men. Yeah, their views are important. But I think in IBAs, I think this is not so much perhaps science really. In a sense, it as I said, it helps us to M&S to prioritize work because we don't have a lot of resources. That's one. I think the other thing is that whether we would like to admit it or not, right? IBAs, and soon to be, we're going to be introduced to this new term called key biodiversity areas also as well. These are the kind of conservation currency that's being bandied at different levels up to the global level. And as a government, I think they want to know that, hey, what is Malaysia doing about this? How many IBAs do we have in Malaysia? How many KDAs do we have in Malaysia? So to me, I think this is one of the ways that we sort of get into the psyche of our government, our politicians, because for some reason they for example like Baku Bentao Bay is an IBA, no brainer in a way. When you do a declaration and the politicians have photo opportunity, it's sort of in a way build pride among the politicians that they help to do something, help to kick the ball further. And also for local communities, they know that, oh, my site is an important bird area. Okay, there is a tag to it. So never mind that it's obvious to us, but to me, I see that it has a certain value in pushing the cause of bird conservation. So imagine right now that you don't have the word IBA, right? But we know that area is important, right? We can still push for the better protection, better conservation, and whatnot. But does it have a hook, for the government to understand that important bird and biodiversity area? Because it's important, and it's for birds and biodiversity. Okay, I understand. So after they understand, then comes with all the scientific proof, scientific, justification. Fine. But first and foremost, they need to at least be able to quickly say that, oh, that area is important. That area is important. So to me, I think that hook of IBA or in future KBA, is going to be crucial to get more buy-in with the government. I hope it answers the question. John.
Well,
thank you. Folks. Oh, sorry, John.
You also have IBAs in America. Ask the Audubon Society, I think.
Maybe we can jump back into this in the panel discussion, but I would also, and I appreciate the overlap in what you're pointing out, Fred, but I would say this, and I'm not sure what the pastimes are in Asia as much as they are in the United States, but I know there's more bird watchers than there are golfers. And I know we've always looked up to birds, and we put birds on our currencies and we put birds on our government buildings. We don't put rare plants. We don't put these other kind of things. And so conservation and ecosystem conservation is a person and a people thing. And so I just want to, what Jaap was saying, if it's our hook for conserving the ecosystems, and I'll save my Thomas Lovejoy quote for my talk, but that's another reason why it might be, just like we're using state of the birds in the United States to try to get at our politicians to make for more ecosystem management friendly policies, as they've successfully done in other places in Europe. I think it's another argument for using birds as our mechanism for people-based conservation.
By the way, John, the favorite pastime of people in Southeast Asia is eating, and that includes birds.
Well, I'll have to, I look forward to learning more about that.
We'll have to
Through
follow up more
eating.
on this conversation in our panel discussion. Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much. Yep. Awesome. So on to our next speaker. And I just want to let our participants know, just as a reminder, if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please put them in the Q&A, not the chat, but in the Q&A. And we will be presenting them to our speakers. And then you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions at the end during the panel discussion. So just wanted to remind folks of that. So next, I would like to introduce Ravinder Kaur. So let's see, Ravinder, she completed her PhD at the University of Malaysia in 2020, studying endangered hornbills and their breeding behavior in Kinabatangan for over 6 years. She works closely with her husband, an award-winning nature and wildlife photographer, and together they founded a social enterprise called Gaia that is dedicated to research and conservation of hornbills in Malaysia. In Greek mythology, Gaia means earth. Gaia strives to grow hornbill preferred food plants, restore dilapidated nest cavities of hornbills, and custom make artificial nest boxes with their project partners. And recently, the team received international recognition, the Marsh Christian Award in 2020, and the Future Conservationist Leadership Award in 2017 for their work with endangered hornbills and artificial nest boxes. And tonight, Ravinder is going to be presenting on her groundbreaking hornbill research and the Kinabatangan Hornbill Project that features work done by Hutan and Gaia. Thanks for joining us, Ravind.
I've unmuted myself. Good morning from Malaysia. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to jump straight into the my presentation. I think that was a very well covered introduction. Oh, sorry. Let me just move this down here. So I'm going to start by talking a bit about hornbills. For those that might not be familiar, hornbills, what's unique about them is they're cavity nesting birds. And, you know, despite being cavity nesting birds, they cannot create these cavities. And they usually rely on other animals like woodpeckers to start this cavity going, or maybe fungal infection. And all these cavities, they are usually formed in very old, mature trees, usually dipterocarp trees. So, and you know, this process takes a long time. You know, you can imagine, you can see in the picture here of a rhinoceros hornbill with its natural cavity. This probably took years to actually form. And, you know, we have 10 species of hornbills, 8 species in Borneo. And each of the species, I notice, have a different, like they're attracted to different shapes, different cavity shapes. Like in this picture, you see the rhinoceros hornbill. It prefers this very long cavity slit, as opposed to like wreath hornbill, which would like a more circular entrance. So, you know, this is something that we try to keep in mind, especially when we create artificial nest boxes for hornbills. So one of the things that I was looking at during my PhD was what is the internal temperature and humidity of, within a natural nest cavity of a hornbill. And this is taken from oriental pied hornbill nest. And in Malaysia, if anyone has been here, you would know that in the middle of the afternoon, it gets so hot. And if you look at the data logger that was recording continuously inside the natural nest tree of an oriental pied, the afternoon, even it didn't matter. It was just between 24 Celsius to 26 Celsius. The temperature was so steady inside. And in the mornings, it gets pretty cold for us by our standards. And yeah, the temperature is very stable throughout the day and night. So this is something that Professor Pillai Ponsot also noted in her thesis. And she explained this as due to the xylem tissues drawing water from the roots, and that movement of water, the constant movement of water that's going up, is what's creating this very low temperature and high humidity within the tree. And this is probably the reason why hornbills don't really nest in dead trees. So when it comes to making artificial nest structures for hornbills, we have to take all this into consideration. You have to take into consideration the type of tree cavity, the shape of the entrance, and also are you offering that particular temperature and humidity range that the hornbills desire. So we were very fortunate because we had a helmeted hornbill nesting within our project site, and this is a critically endangered bird. So the team, we decided to concentrate more on this particular nest. So we watched this nest over a span of 6 years, and we watched them have 3 chicks, 2 males and 1 female. This publication is with Folktail, and then we also did an occupancy survey estimating the availability of potential hornbill nest trees in the secondary forest patch in Kinabatangan. And we also have my thesis. So all this is available to anyone who's interested. Just drop me a line and I can send it over to you. I'm still publishing papers for my thesis, so I don't want to just put it up on the internet just yet. So after I completed my PhD, it made sense to continue because we have so much local support and such strong partnerships. One of our biggest partners is Hutan NGO. And of course, there's so much conservation work that needs to be done. And all that opportunity, we've located so many different types of hornbill nests. And we are so very fortunate that, despite the pandemic and all that's been going on, we somehow got funding from Yayasan Saim Dabi. And we're happy to say that we're going into 2022 with 6 people employed under Gaia. So we're very excited to do more and, achieve more. So this is a map of Malaysia, and we have 2 project sites at the moment in Kenyir and Kinabatangan. But today I'll be just presenting about Kinabatangan. So I promise you this is the most wordiest slide I have here. So in Kinabatangan, what we have done in the past and what we plan to do in the future is to increase safe breeding opportunities for hornbills. Because hornbills are cavity nesters, and those large trees that used to be there in Kinabatangan have been logged, have been taken away. So we're trying to offer them something while the forest regenerates. So we're building artificial nest boxes for large-bodied hornbills, and we also restore tree cavities. And this usually works for smaller-bodied hornbills because the forest that we work with is a logged-over forest and the trees are not very large. We're always looking for new nests, especially with the Hutan team in Kinabatangan. When you find a hornbill nest, a natural nest, there's so much to learn from it. You can learn about the food, what's their diet, and you can also learn about how they utilize that cavity and what kind of cavities that they prefer, based on the species. It's also a treasure trove under the nest tree, because all the seeds that they regurgitate and that falls and accumulates under the tree is what we pick up and try to plant. So these are the hornbill preferred food plants in Kinabatangan that we're also growing. We're not botanists by training, but we are learning, and we are very fortunate because we have the reforestation team that's with Hutan, and they are so kind to help us with this. And also they are taking the seeds that have germinated and they're planting it to try to connect fragments of forest, and basically plant it wherever it needs to be planted. We're also very excited because we have a master student with us, Ashraf from Danau Girang, and he is looking at how to use bioacoustics, particularly for hornbills. So there's a lot of questions that we need answered, such as, how high are we putting this equipment, and how long they should run, how far should it be from the calling bird, etc. Basically all the protocols, he's trying to develop that. And like what Yap mentioned, citizen science is a great way of keeping an eye on the forest. But usually these people are spending a lot of time on the edges of the forest. They probably walking on the roads, on the trails. So we're hoping with bioacoustics we can go into the interior of the forest and it can be recording for longer times. So it would be a nice synergy. Then you have citizen science and you have data from like deep inside the forest. So you get a better overview of what's going on in the forest. Some of the things that we are working with Sabah Wildlife Department and Sabah Forestry Department is the manual on artificial nest boxes and also the Sabah State Action Plan. These documents should be ready within the next 2 to 3 years. So I love this slide very much because to help an Asian hornbill, you actually need global support and worldwide support. We have the local people here, the Orang Sungai in Kinabatangan. They are amazing. They are so dedicated to conservation, and they are really taking care of the Kinabatangan forest. And then we have zookeepers that come from Phoenix Zoo, Chester Zoo, and Buval Zoo. They used to come every year in March before the pandemic, and we used to build artificial nest boxes together. And what I love about this is these zookeepers, they spend a lot of time with the birds. They are in direct contact with the birds. Unlike, people like me, we're always observing these wild hornbills from afar. So it's really nice to come together and, share our experiences and our knowledge. And together we build these artificial nest boxes with the Orang Kampung, which is, the local villages. And, even the woodwork is done by Helson, a local carpenter. So we all come together, we build different types of boxes. In fact, we've put up boxes and we've given them phases. So we have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and we have over 20 boxes in Kinabatangan. And I believe we have 8 more ready for installation just before the pandemic hit. And I mentioned earlier that we do cavity restoration. This is an example of what we do. This was a tree cavity within the village. And we noticed that the oriental pike kept visiting this nest. This cavity. It wasn't a nest, it was just a cavity. So Helson, there's a picture of Helson up there. He went up there, he looked into the cavity, and he found that the floor of the cavity had collapsed more than a meter. So we just did the simple restoration work as prescribed by the Thailand Hornbill Project. They do a lot of cavity restoration and they're very successful. So we just try to replicate that. They put soil inside until, just to raise the flooring. And Helson also said, the ceiling is a bit low. So he took a chisel and he made the ceiling a bit higher. But you got to do very minimal to this because you don't want to kill the tree. So we did this, and we also put a fern to try to give it more shade the fern died, as you can see in the bigger picture. The fern died, but it created such an ideal perch for the hornbill. So these are things that we needed to consider for the bird. You know, nice, comfortable perch so he doesn't slip when he's, you know, trying to feed the female that's inside. And you know, we did this in, I think, a month before it actually got taken over by the hornbills. So it's like there's a demand for these cavities, and you know, it works. You know, cavity restoration can work. So we restored 6 different cavities. 4 were successful, and from those 4 cavities, we actually had 9 oriental pie chicks fledge from those nests. So, and we haven't really tried this, you know, because, you know, then the pandemic hit, but we're really looking forward to doing more cavity restoration, because it really, it's one of the fastest way to get hornbills to nest, but usually for the smaller bodied hornbills in Kinabatangan. So I mentioned that we're doing a lot of tree planting, and we're usually working with non-figs. But recently, during the pandemic, since the guys in the field had some time, and Dr. Zainal very kindly from Bora invited some of our teammates and also the Hutan team to come and learn how to plant, how to propagate figs, either from seeds or cuttings. And what I like about this is, apparently, if you grow figs from cuttings, they tend to fruit faster within 5 years. But if you grow them from seed, it might take more than 10 years. So this is very exciting for us, you know, because we want more birds in the forest, and growing figs is definitely one way to encourage the bird population. So way before I went to Kinabatangan, Hutan, Chester Zoo, and Buval Zoo had put up 5 artificial nest boxes. So I'm going to call this the phase 1 artificial nest boxes. And for the longest time, I think it was about 3 years before it was actually used by the hornbills. They were visiting the boxes. And if you looked at the lower left-hand side of my slide, you see a pair of hornbills coming to the box. And you can see how different the box looks. You know, the picture at the back, you can see time has made it really looking more natural. But before that, it looked, you know, very brown, beige in color. And we had camera traps up. And this may have been one of the reasons why it was slow for the hornbills to start nesting, because for some reason, the male hornbills were very intrigued by camera traps. And there are a lot of pictures of the male hornbills very interested in the camera traps, while the females were more interested in the artificial nest boxes. So, you know, one day while I was looking at all these, you know, camera trap photos, I was like, oh my God, this is a distraction. So whenever we put up artificial nest boxes, we run those cameras for maybe a few months, and then we bring them down. So yeah, it takes a long time for hornbills to actually warm up to artificial nest boxes. It took about 2 to 3 years. But once they started using these boxes, they started coming back, and we've had 5 rhinoceros hornbills chicks fledge from these boxes. This is phase 2 of the nest boxes. So this was when I was around. I worked with several zoos, and I used the data that I had from the internal temperature and humidity. So we came up with this box. It's very heavy because the walls are very thick, because we want to achieve that low temperature, high humidity. But it was very exciting because this particular box with the knobby shaped cavity, as you can see in the blue arrow, it was made more for the helmeted hornbill, which likes that protruding knobby shaped cavity entrance. But what was fascinating was it was also attracting wrinkle hornbills, which we rarely saw coming to the phase 1 boxes. So this little change in structure made quite a difference, attracting a different species. And then, of course, we got some other visitors and some other animals that decided to take over the nest boxes. This is one of the highest boxes we put up, 32, if I'm not mistaken, 32 meters up in on a tree. And this squirrel just moved in within a month later. She had her babies in it. Though it's not our target species, but it really shows that in a logged over forest, in a secondary forest, we've lost those tree cavities. And not only the hornbills are suffering, but other animals as well. And even selective logging, when they choose really large mature trees, they're taking away those trees with cavities that are actually very, very important. So one of the things that, we need to consider is to really be careful, if you're going to cut down a tree, if it is selected for logging and if it bears a cavity, it should be spared. And sadly, there's not many studies in Asia on this. And I really hope to see more work done on tree cavities, even what trees they form in, because one of the things I see, but I can't confirm, is that those cavities that occurred in dipterocarp trees, they were long lasting, and compared to the cavities that are in the secondary forest, because they occur in softwood trees, they change very fast. The cavity entrances tend to close up, the floorings would collapse. There's so many things that happens to the cavities that occur in secondary forests. It's like the lifespan is very short, so which is a problem for cavity nesting animals. So the phase 3 boxes are what we are most happy with, because it's light, it's durable. This is made from a plastic barrel nestled in another plastic barrel. You can see the surface is so natural looking. These are all the beautiful ideas suggested to us by the zoos. And during the pandemic, we weren't able to check on these boxes, but the guys just went I think just last month, and there are remnants of sealing material at the entrance of the nest box. And the dimensions of the cavity entrance is actually, the box entrance is actually from Thailand. And it's very successful, especially for when you're dealing with the rhinoceros hornbills. So yes, that's all for me. I've hit my 20-minute mark. Thank you so much. I just want to give a shout out to all our sponsors. We can't do this without you guys. And if you're interested in any of our outreach material, we have two different types of coloring materials that are available on our website. And yes, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Ravinder. That was awesome. Any questions for Ravinder? So a question here. You had mentioned that you have a lot of local support for your project and that citizen science can play an important role. So I was just curious, from your perspective, what a successful citizen science program could look like and what capacity you would need to have a sustainable, effective program like that.
So I can give you an example of in Kenya, we work with one of the birders with the Turgano, MNS Turgano branch. So he loves to park his car on the side of the road and walk along and look at hornbills. But he doesn't want to go into the forest. It is challenging to go in there, and if you don't have a machete and all that. But through his observations just from the road, he actually notices behaviors. Like he notices like certain hornbills going to certain areas. So he tells us, he notifies us, and we send our team into the forest to find. And usually we would find something. We'd find a nest or something. So that collaboration is very nice. So simple things that they can observe. Even there are young hornbills right now. So we could probably even come up with the breeding table, when these hornbills are breeding, when is their breeding season. Yeah, so there's so many ways citizen science can help.
Awesome. And there was another question about the boxes. Is there any evidence of success for helmeted or other species?
Oh, sadly, no. Professor Pillai Ponswat said that helmeted hornbills break their boxes. So we've had camera traps up there and we've never seen them visiting. And this is something that really bothers me. Why is it that, okay, I can understand why helmeted wouldn't visit it. It is quite a rare, and it's also quite a picky and picky bird. But why is it we don't see white crown hornbills coming to just even look at the boxes, or black hornbills? Yeah, we never see them. Yeah. But we've had bushy crested hornbills nest in our boxes. We've had rhinoceros hornbill and oriental pied nest in our boxes.
Thank you so much. And if anyone thinks of any other questions, Ravin will be back during the panel discussion, so you can ask her more questions then. We are going to take a 15-minute break for folks, and then we will be back in 15 minutes at 6:55.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, I would like to actually introduce our third speaker before we begin our panel discussion. And our last speaker of the evening is John Alexander. And John Alexander, he's the co-founder of the Klamath Bird Observatory. And John works with the Bird Observatory's Board of Directors, Research Advisor, Science Director, Outreach and Science Communications Specialist, and Executive Administrator overseeing all aspects of the organization's efforts. John has been working to integrate bird conservation with natural resource management in the Pacific Northwest since 1992. He is focused on applying bird conservation science as a tool for advancing ecosystem conservation regionally, nationally, and internationally. His expertise includes participatory action research, ecological monitoring, and research using standard bird and habitat sampling techniques, the use of scientific results for overcoming land stewardship challenges. And John will be presenting tonight on the Klamath Bird Observatory's one-of-a-kind training program that helps build local champions, capacity, and support for bird conservation efforts, and share success stories that have transformed bird conservation efforts worldwide.
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much to Oregon State University for partnering with Klamath Bird Observatory, both on our domestic work and our international programs, Matt and Michelle and others. Really want to thank Renee, and I want to thank our panelists and Robert, who got to visit us a couple of years ago, right before all of this pandemic stuff started. So I just really appreciate being here. I'm going to bring us back a little bit. Most of my models are Western Hemisphere focused, and what I am here to talk about with us and work on with the panelists and this group of people that are working internationally on bird conservation in Sabah is whether some of these models that we've been applying to international bird conservation capacity building in the Western Hemisphere might apply. And so lots of partners, that's the key to what we do, lots of people and lots of relationships. So I want to recognize that birds connect our world. Here's an example of one of North America's longest migrants, if you consider its body size, using community science data collected by Cornell. On the left, the rufous hummingbird, and on the right, the yellow-breasted chat, a one-of-a-kind species, a species that is the only species within its taxonomic group. And their migratory routes that connect the western forests of North America to the highland pine and oak and cloud forests of western Mexico and northern Central America. And recognizing also that birds connect the world, I'm wondering whether any of you all heard about this through the World Migratory Bird Day Network. October is one of the months we celebrate World Migratory Bird Day. We like to celebrate World Migratory Bird Day every day, but we recognize that birds connect our world, and they connect all of us. They bring light to our skies and song and color, and they can hold away despair. And like the canary in the coal mine, they are the bellwethers of our own existence. One of the fathers of conservation, Thomas Lovejoy, once said that if you take care of birds, you can take care of most of the environmental problems in the world. So we must have hope. And from that hope must come an adaptive, science-driven strategy for saving birds and thus the ecosystems on which we all depend. As Matt Betts mentioned last night, in 2019, Rosenberg et al. Published a groundbreaking paper suggesting that since 1970, we've lost nearly 3 billion birds in North America. 1 in every 5 birds lost as a result of human impacts that are resulting in the inability of our ecosystems to even sustain our most common birds. And while this study highlights a bird crisis, it also documents promising rebounds resulting from galvanized human efforts. In North America, waterfowl and raptor species have been made remarkable recoveries over the past 50 years, made possible by our investments in conservation. So we can save birds as a society if we decide to. And that's what the organization that my organization works within grew out of an organization called Partners in Flight. Partners in Flight is built around a mission to keep common birds common and help our most at-risk species through voluntary science-driven partnership. The Klamath Bird Observatory incorporates a partner-driven conservation planning approach that integrates long-term monitoring, applied ecology, and theoretical research into addressing our most pressing bird conservation concerns. We operate in the Klamath-Siskiyou bioregion on the Northern California, Southern Oregon region, one of the most biodiverse temperate forest systems in the world. We also operate throughout the Pacific Northwest through a decision support system called Avian Knowledge Northwest. And then we follow our birds where they take us through their migrations to make sure that we're building capacities to do this kind of work throughout the life cycle of these birds to make sure we're addressing throughout their life cycle the threats that they face. So Klamath, as I mentioned, here we built a regionally focused monitoring and research program that quickly grew from the early 1990s into one of the most comprehensive bird monitoring programs around. And our concept is to use birds as ecological indicators to address some of our most pressing land use issues. An observatory is not only a place where you can go to observe birds, but it's also an institution for observation-based scientific research and monitoring. And that's how we define ourselves. All of those data that I showed in that map, those were points scattered throughout everywhere, are curated into a interactive data management and decision support science delivery system called the Avian Knowledge Network. And we operate, as I mentioned, a regional node called Avian Knowledge Northwest. The Avian Knowledge Network visions a world where bird populations thrive through the conservation and management that's informed by a network of avian knowledge. And to achieve this vision, we support a network of people, data, and technology to improve bird conservation management and research across organizational and spatial scales. And our approach is driven in social sciences, really recognizing that bird conservation really is a people thing, even though it's about birds and ecosystems. And so one of the things we focus on is the unique capacities of non-government organizations to do academic level science to help bridge the gap between academia and management. And we've done such a great job working with Oregon State University, where folks like the folks in the BETS lab can take our data and do state-of-the-art science with it that's applied, and then we can use our partnerships throughout the range of our birds to try to bring those data to bear on decisions that are being made today. And the strategy that we employ involves developing and maintaining relationships with the people who make decisions, early collaboration with decision makers to make sure that our science is designed to answer relevant questions, and then implementing research and monitoring within an adaptive management model to deliver that science, not just through the journals, but beyond the journals, through mechanisms that the people who make decisions can absorb and use. So this is what we're doing with our international capacity building as well. We're working to apply our NGO model for partner-driven science and conservation in a way, in places to build grassroots programs that are locally owned and locally driven, but providing the training that's needed to build those grassroots programs in those areas, and then provide support for those programs as they become self-directed and self-driven. And we do that mainly through three approaches. One, we offer international workshops in countries where we're invited to come. This is an example. Through those workshops, we'll identify people who are holding promise and interested in learning more, and bring them to our intensive internships at our field station in Oregon, in the United States. And then for those folks that continue in the field, we offer mentorship, organizational development, and partnerships, and partnership development opportunities for them as they work to build their own programs. Here's an example of one of our students who came from Colombia, did one of our intensive internships, and here's teaching a workshop in Peru. So now a lot of the workshops that we teach, we don't even teach, it's the students that we had with us that go out and about and teach. Just in the past 5 years, we've had 5 international workshops. We've had 10 visiting scholars through the international programs at Oregon State University. 3 international bird observatories have spawned and developed through this model. We've developed relationships with not only Oregon State, but universities in Mexico, including the University of Guadalajara. Business conservation plans, hummingbird conservation guides, applied monitoring research projects throughout the range of our birds, habitat conservation agreements and restoration projects, community education and support for bird conservation. And we've helped to raise over $220,000 in matching funds to support this work. A lot of that right now coming from Environment and Climate Change Canada, who's working to support our international partners. And we're developing the next generation of conservation leaders. As I mentioned, here's Miguel teaching a workshop, the in-country workshops. We've had over 20 sessions in 10 countries, including Costa Rica, El Salvador, Mexico. We've worked in the Bahamas and Trinidad, Antigua, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, and in Canada. And so then when we go, as I mentioned, to those workshops, we'll identify people who are interested in coming up and doing intensive internships with us. And fortunately, Robert and the folks that came to visit Oregon State University came up to see this internship program and our field station in action. So we've seen all these beautiful pictures of the birds and the landscapes of Sabah. And I just wanted to show you a little bit of some of the places where our interns work. Here's the Upper Klamath Basin. This refuge complex was created over 100 years ago by Theodore Roosevelt. It was the first refuge in the United States set aside to protect the habitats where migratory birds stop over during their migrations. This is one of our cabins where our activities occur, perched out on the lake. Another one of our historic cabins on the wildlife refuges to residents for our interns. And the third one, this is where Robert and folks from Oregon State came to visit us. And at these different stations, we run what we call constant effort banding stations. And at these banding stations, we collect important information about long-term trends and importantly, demographics and bird populations. A professor of mine once mentioned, if we count birds and watch their declines, we can write their obituaries. And it's not until we get in deep and learn the demographics of their productivity, their survival, that we can actually start to uncover the causes of population decline. And so we do that by running mist nets and capturing birds, so we can look at them very carefully and closely and get an understanding of their body condition, their annual survival, their age ratios that give us information about whether they are producing young in certain areas and not producing young in other areas. What part of their life cycle are they appear to be limited with regards to their survival, and other really intricate things about population dynamics that we need to understand in order to focus conservation efforts in the areas where birds most need them. From the high elevation conifer forests, next to some of the largest trees that remain in the state of Oregon, along our rivers and our riparian corridors that have been interrupted by dams and other kind of things where there's gigantic restoration efforts happening. Currently, where we've been working for 20 years, we're looking at taking out some of the largest dam systems in the country and embarking on one of the biggest river restoration programs in North America. Oak woodlands and meadows that are overlooked by giant volcanic mountains. And some of our interns even come and see their first snow they've ever seen and have to figure out how to string a mist net in that mist net lane that seems to be covered by a retained snowdrift. And so we teach these bird handling methods, really thinking about a model that's defined by person safety, bird safety, and good science equals fun. And if we're having fun, then we can do bird conservation. But we're not having fun if we're not doing good science. We're not having fun if we're not thinking of bird safety when we're handling these magical gems. We not only hold them, but we behold them. And if we're not taking care of each other. Collecting meticulous data. A lot of our banding stations where our interns come have been in operation for over 25 years. and working together to learn these different skill sets where they can be applied throughout the range of our migratory birds. Curating the data and making sure that it's not just about data collection, but it's about how do we get the data into the hands that people can use, and then teaching the people who collect the data to use the data so they can be used for bird conservation. This is a data entry party, if anybody ever thought there could be such a thing. And so then we teach those skill sets, but many times we'll invite the interns back for a second year for advanced internship programs where they learn project management, training, data analysis, scientific writing, and organizational development, specifically with regards to developing science-based nonprofit organizations. We've developed a pretty rigorous curriculum. It's based on the North American Banding Council standards for bird banding. North American Banding Council is an organization that promotes sound and ethical banding of birds. We put forth a code of ethics. We have a series of training and study manuals and a curriculum. Not only inline courses, but online courses, workshops are taught through the North American Banding Program and certifications. And many of our international interns have become leaders in the North American Banding Council that are now promoting the certification of bird banders throughout Latin America. We also produce information for communities throughout the ranges of our birds. This is an example of a bird that talks about the shared birds of Ashland, Oregon, and Guanajuato, Mexico, where our migratory birds, such as this hermit warbler and the black-throated gray warbler, visits habitats that almost look similar on their breeding grounds to the left and on their wintering grounds to the right. Our international internships, we've had over 75 participants from 15 countries. We've had more than 7 advanced internships, and we've certified over 40 banders and 10 bander trainers who go on to become leaders in conservation. I wanted to highlight one of our interns, Ana Maria Gonzalez Prieto. She first came to us in 2005 when we went to Colombia to do a workshop in San Andres. And Ana Maria represents one thing that's really important to KBO, which is the relationships that we developed, and she coined the term that we've taken on, the KBO family. She models excellence and leadership in conservation. In 2006, she joined our crew. She was selected from the participants at the San Andres workshop and joined our crew, and then returned in 2007 for an advanced training in leadership, project management, and banding training. At KBO, and in positions she was hired to fill later, Ana says, she successfully overcame challenges related to supervising men who were not used to being supervised by women. She developed approaches to conflict that takes two to fight, but instead she approaches her leadership with 100% confidence in her training. She knows she's right when she's right, and she's open to when she's uncertain. Her ethics are outstanding for learning and teaching. Her NABC, North American Banding Council, training evolved into her becoming the international committee chair for this organization. She's trained banders in over 6 countries, and she defines, as I mentioned, the KBO family. She exemplifies the importance of relationships. She's worked with people from Colombia, like Nick Bailey, to people in Canada, where she got her PhD, Keith Hobson, to develop state-of-the-art research on overwintering of migratory birds in Colombia, building the capacities for organizations like Selva in Colombia, that's a leader in international bird conservation. She's got an impressive bird publication record, and she's even had her Swainson's thrushes that she's banded in Colombia follow her to British Columbia through technologies such as MODIS and other kind of tracking techniques. And Keith Hobson had to say about Ana Maria that she supervises field crews and researchers in Colombia with excellence and meticulousness. And just this year, Ana Maria won the Early Professionals Award in the American Ornithological Society. We've also had some really successful success stories, in organizational development, the Costa Rica Bird Observatories, the San Pancho Bird Observatory. Here's a story about the San Pancho Bird Observatory. Dr. Sarahi Contreras, who's a hummingbird expert at the University of Guadalajara, has helped us work with Luis Morales, who's developed this program in Western Mexico. And we're family. And this is a picture of my family and Sadahi's family up at the Monetlan, the biosphere and the Los Hoyos field station celebrating the new year. So these are long-lasting relationships that we're developing through these efforts to build partnerships. Here's a tri-national team that got together. Two of our interns that Luis and Sadahi and I have worked with, Saeed and Martin, are valued collaborators, and now they're leaders in developing training and monitoring programs in Mexico. And of course, the next generation, this is Luis's son at one of our banding stations working with us. And so these partnerships have developed to create these networks of people. This is an example of a workshop we did in Guadalajara, where we developed an outline for guidelines for engagement to overcome challenges in bird conservation relating to organizational relationships and NGO, academic, and government relationships, both inter and intranationally. Such things have resulted in international bird conservation plans that identify the threats that our birds most face on their wintering and breeding grounds and outline strategies for developing these plans. Complicated, yet straightforward ways that we can intervene in human activities to do better things for bird populations by more sustainably managing the ecosystems in which they live. This has become the platform for groundbreaking research on the connectivity of birds that breed in Canada and the United States and winter in Mexico, following these birds through their migrations, through these international capacities that we've built for developing these scientific programs that then graduate students can come and work on top of, connecting our breeding populations with wintering populations and vice versa. And then identifying different dynamics of bird population movements, like very complicated movements of clockwise patterns that rufous hummingbirds follow throughout their migrations. This is some research that one of Matt Betts's PhD students, who was also a research associate at KBO, worked on. And then developing guides to help us identify where and what we can do for these birds, like the rufous hummingbird, throughout their life cycle. And so this is just an example of some of the models that we hope to use and that we have been using in different places and that we propose might be adapted for use in other places where bird conservation might be limited by in-country capacities. I'm very impressed with all of the work that we're seeing in Sabah, so I'm not suggesting that there are limitations in Sabah, but there's always room for growth. And so we're excited to continue working with this team to see what we can do to continue building capacity for bird conservation that's based on science, including monitoring and research projects that are integrated. And that's what I have tonight. And hopefully I'm still here and you all are still there.
Dun, 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 we're still here.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. Any questions for John?
Sorry, now my computer's going crazy. There we go.
So how long does it take, John, to once, kind of folks go through that program, what is kind of the timeline for going through the program and then being able to build capacity and champions kind of within their own country for that kind of program?
So we find that our internship program can last up to 6 months. We recommend it lasts no longer than 3. To become a leader in bird banding, to become an expert bird bander, we find that 6 months is an adequate amount of time for somebody who's equipped to learn those kind of things. Not everybody has the dexterity and capacity to learn these kind of things, but most people do. That 6 months is about what it takes to be able to become what we call a station leader, where you can go and employ the methods that we've taught to use this kind of methodology for bird banding, at least anywhere in the world. One of the really neat things about what we teach is that the life cycle of birds, no matter where you are, tends to be quite similar. And so we often go, and while we know the different molting strategies and the aging techniques of our birds here with family descriptions of bird life cycle patterns and molting strategies. We can learn to capture and age birds based on their life cycles with birds that we've never even had in our hand before, as long as we have some sort of understanding of how the families molt in general. So we find that 6 months is about the time that it takes. If somebody comes to us with a good amount of banding experience already, then we find that in that period of time, we can help them to become certified as a trainer and actually begin to teach other people. But in the 6 months, you learn the skills, and then the way our program works is 4 months in, we bring a new suite of students. So anybody who's been here for that amount of time begins to learn how to train as well. Luis Morales was very much interested in the organizational development piece. He was here for less than 6 months, and he has a fully fledged bird observatory. Others that are experts in the field that really want to focus on bird banding, it's been 2 internships where they've come and learned the skills first, and then the leadership skills, the training, and the organizational development during a shorter second internship. That's been beneficial. But the standard 6-month internship would build the capacity to begin to employ these methodologies back in your home country.
Thank you. Do the bands harm the eggs that they sit on? That was another question.
That is a good question. Not that I know of. In most circumstances, they do not. Bird banding has been happening in North America for over 100 years. There's been a lot of studies to the potential impacts on survival for bands, but I've never heard that question as to whether the bird bands will actually scratch the eggs or do something negative to the eggs that the birds are sitting on. And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm guessing no.
Thank you. And another question, from what you've been talking about, do you see some ways that Klamath Bird Observatory and maybe OSU can interact with folks in Sabah to develop a partnership?
I've been hearing some strands in everybody's conversations that we've been having last night with Matt and others that I think that maybe some of them, I think that all of this is already being done, but maybe we can focus on some of these strands, making sure that the research and monitoring that we do is relevant to the folks in country that are making the decisions that we're doing. When we design monitoring, we design it around questions that are of concern to the conservationists in that area. And I think you guys are already doing it with the long-term partnership that Robert has with Matt and Michelle and others. And I'm just so glad to be being brought into that partnership. So I think that we do have things that we could build on. And I'm hearing a need for long-term monitoring. And I think what's really critical about that is the in-country capacities to do that. It's not researchers coming from abroad to do the work, but it's building that capacity, educational opportunities, which I see a lot of already happening in this area. And then the social science part about it is really critical, the co-production. That the science that we're doing, we're not just doing for the interest of the science alone, but we're doing it because it's answering questions that are relevant to Robert and his colleagues and others who are making important decisions about what to protect, where to manage. Some of the conversations that we were having with Matt about, do we protect or do we share, and how do we integrate those in a mosaic of conservation lands across the country and things like that. So I absolutely see you all have already built the huge potential for this. And I think it's just a matter of commitment and moving forward with that, and possibly some capacity building with regards to training for more in-country expertise. I can't hear you, Renee. Can others?
Sorry, I was muted. So this is kind of following up on the previous question, but there was a question on how long it will take to do bird banding in general, or a course or a training for the bird banding piece.
How long would it take to do bird banding in general? So I would recommend that that internships, if there are promising people who are really interested, one of the things is we all, it's always where are people going to go next, right? And some of the things that we look for in interns are people who want to return to the countries and do the work in the countries where they are and build that capacity in the countries. As Matt said the other day, we can start monitoring programs or research programs using time for space kind of monitoring or research designs to start to get really relevant answers in 2 to 3 years. But I think that it's important to think about integrating monitoring and research together. And as we develop those capacities to answer short-term questions, put into place sustainable long-term monitoring programs. Jaap was talking about that too, to address the long-term needs of that and integrate those two needs. Research and monitoring don't always fall together, but monitoring should always be develop monitoring programs with a research framework and a question in mind. But then again, we can always think about how we've done so much with our data that we collected 20 years ago that we never thought we would be able to do with our data, that there's also that aspect. So I would say we could do a training workshop there. I think a training workshop that's either a week or 2 weeks starts to get people interested and starts to get people's juices flowing. You mix it with younger people that are up and coming and the decision makers that are there so they can see the techniques and understand why they're relevant to them. Identify promising prospects for internships, bring them and give them the training that they need to then begin to lead those kind of training programs themselves and those monitoring programs themselves. I think in a matter of 3 to 5 years, you can be up and running with a robust bird monitoring program that includes constant effort banding. It's really important. It's not just one method though. We want to employ multiple methods to really get at the broad level of questions that we want to ask across spatial scales.
Great, thank you for that. And with that, I would love to bring all the panelists back because we're starting to get questions for the panel discussion. And so if I can have the panelists for both nights turn on their cameras and join the discussion, that would be fantastic. And so the first question for you all is, do you see ecotourism being able to play a role in bird conservation in the future? And if so, are there any pitfalls that you see?
Well, I'll jump into that at first. One of the things I was impressed with is that there is a lot of eBird data out there where you all are, and I'm not sure whether your other community/citizen science programs are taking advantage of eBird. I think one of the things that Fred mentioned is something to be careful of. Birders like to go where birds are, so it's important for us to engage ecotourism in not only where birds are, but where birds could be and where birds once were. And I think that birders tend to sometimes not all have the birding ethics that we can teach them through what I would call conservation birding ecotourism programs, to identify how they can not only spend their money to check more birds off on their list, but then go and become long-term partners and supporters of the places that need their resources the most. So there's a bit of training that needs to be done with the ecotourists to integrate conservation and conservation birding into what they're doing. But I'd be interested in what other people think.
Well, there's no doubt that the ecotourism boom in Sabah has changed the society substantially. When I first went to Sabah, people would say, "Why are you going in the forest? There's nothing there." And who cares? And now the people in Sabah are extremely proud of the forest and particular places like Mount Kinabalu and Danum. And this social change has had a huge effect to the benefit of conservation. And there's a substantial economic, I would imagine, I got no data, but a substantial economic element of this, which is all these ecotourists are pouring into the country and making the place famous. It's probably the single biggest tourist destination in Southeast Asia. So that's had a huge effect on conservation. How the individual birders add to data or the process, I'm not quite sure because I don't know anything about that stuff. But
Yeah, I think ecotourism. First, I think I would be very careful in how we use the term ecotourism. To actually, in all honesty, right now in Malaysia, ecotourism is not the kind of strict ecotourism definition that we see. I think it's more safe to assume that it's mostly nature-based tourism, and we can define according to that. But it's definitely not ecotourism if you want to apply the strict definition of it. Nowhere exemplifies nature-based tourism best in Malaysia, other than Sabah. In fact, actually, I think if you look at the how much it contributes to the economic pie of Sabah, if I'm not mistaken, it's either the second most important economic sector for Sabah. Sabah has a lot of natural resources, and in this case, birds as well. And I think, yes, birding tourism, there's not even now a term called birding tourism. So M&S in, I think, 18 years ago, we did a feasibility study of birding tourism for our Ministry of Tourism back then. And again, at that point, we already started to use Sabah as the role model, and we use Borneo, Danang Valley, Borneo Rainforest Lodge, I think, as the pinnacle, the epitome, the shining example of how you can actually do proper ecotourism if you're really serious about bringing high quality tourists or birders to this country. So I think for Sabah, because it relies heavily on natural resource for tourism, so it's not surprising that they would also give, hopefully, more attention to keeping the natural resources, including birds, sustainable, viable, wisely used as well. This is sometimes a bit different, and it's harder to argue. For example, in Peninsular Malaysia, we have a lot of different kinds of tourism. Nature tourism is just one small part within the big pie of tourism. So if that is the case, right, then if we argue economically, would that be of interest to the state government in keeping birds, preserving birds and its natural forest? Plus we have also other competing types of ecotourism. Other types of tourism. We have shopping tourism, which brings in more money in the case of compared to nature-based tourism. In Sabah, we don't have a lot of places to shop. So the economic pie sometimes determines on how much the government will pay attention to conservation also in this way. But just to say that, yes, birding tourism tourists do have a role to play. And I think one of the things that we actually benefited quite a lot in trying to get an insight into their brain is actually scrutinizing the birding trip reports that comes out through many bird tour companies that land in Malaysia. We certainly did that as one of our background or literature study during our consultancy with the Ministry of Tourism. So yes, hopefully that can be a strength. And using eBirds also as well, yes, that can also possibly be a strength. A lot of M&S bird data actually has been transferred to eBird. So I think anybody would have access, or for certain species, you have special access according to the administrator, I think.
I think I just want to add on about what John was saying also. It's important if it's done ethically. And one of the issues I see we have is the use of callbacks. And I think RDC is very interesting. Robert manages RDC, and you have the, what they say, the ethical birding guidelines, right? For the area. So no callbacks and all that. That's very important. Yeah. Birds come first.
you know, one thing that we did to get some Rotary International money for bird conservation efforts, both in Costa Rica and in Western Mexico. And I never thought that I would crack the nut on Rotary for ecosystem conservation efforts. But when they started to develop a sustainability program, we put forth a model around sustainability and systems thinking that considered the 3 E's of sustainability, which are environment, economics, and social equity. And that if our ecotourism programs and what we were building on ecotourisms that were conservation based, that you'd see reinforcing feedback loops economically, environmentally, so it wasn't impacting, but more doing good or mitigating the impact by doing good, and then taking into account social equity issues. So the local communities were the ones that were benefiting from the environmental and economic benefits of the ecotourism that was happening there. And that was a model that we've been able to put forth to kind of combat some of the other things that are happening in areas like Western Mexico and Jalisco and Nayarit, where all of these big resorts are going in, trying to tell these little towns that maybe you can do better for your families and for your communities by sustaining your ecosystems and doing something that's more economically sustainable that keeps your kids at home instead of get your kids down into these big places where they soon get drawn from these large resorts into other more criminal like economically influential opportunities. And so that was the model that we used to try to promote a more sustainable tourism model in these areas with measures.
Yeah, I think issues like using playbacks, as what Ravi has pointed out, you know, it's a very, it can be a hot potato kind of question, and it's very hard to enforce. There is no real law, I mean, in our country that says that you cannot use playback, but also, you know, the law is very vague in interpreting how does playback affect birds, you know, when does it affect, when is it prosecutable and things like that, you know. So it's very hard to put that into practice, you know, putting birds above, putting birds first, you know. Nowadays, I think we see that while birding is sort of growing, the other part which is also growing is photography, bird photography. So bird photographers may not have the same ethics as, let's say, birders, you know, just for comparison. Not to say all birders are great also as well, you know, but at the end of the day, is that what ethics do you practice? For bird photographers, some don't really care, you know, the picture comes first, you know, so they'll do whatever it takes to nail that picture perfect. And the other thing that sort of begs the question, and again, it's very hard to say it's right, it's wrong, it's prosecutable, it's not, is you establish feeding stations, you know, bird feeding stations. So in America, you have people feeding hummingbirds. You know, I don't follow the ethical questions of that, I don't know. But over here in some of the montane areas in Peninsular Malaysia and even in maybe some of the lowland forests, you have already feeding stations. So it has been, they bait the birds, put the food there. Birds are obviously smart, you know, they know that there's food there and they'll keep on going there. So almost in a case that, for example, a partridge in a forest, which is absolutely difficult to see, now with feeding stations, the birds come quite easily in a way. So the birders get a view of it, the bird watchers get a view of it, but it also begs the question: does it change the behavior? You know, is it healthy for it? You know, is it? But it brings money to the local community. You know, and then for hornbills, you have local communities feeding oriental pied papayas. In some cases, even bread. You know, in some of the islands, I've seen them, you know, become part of the tourism itinerary. In Langkawi, you have eagle feeding, Brahmini kites, white-bellied sea eagle. The moment things like this become part of the tourism itinerary, it's very hard to take it off the itinerary already, because people have invested in bringing people seeing there. They've invested in boats, they invested in a shed, they invested in many things, and then suddenly you say cannot do it. the politicians will have a field day, and then they'll come back to conservation again. So it's a very, very challenging question to or problem, if it becomes a problem to tackle. And there doesn't seem to be an easy answer. To me, the easiest is don't start, you don't have a problem. Once you start, you want to have a guideline, you want to have a law, then you have to go back down to enforcement. Then if you go back down to enforcement, are you able to enforce? Which goes back to resources. So it's tough lah, you know. So if you have examples in America that shows that, you know, all this kind of thing works, you know, it happens, it works, but at least the birds don't suffer badly because of it, they'll be great, you know. There's some thoughts lah on what's happening here.
So there has to be some sense of proportion. If you're on an island and you're feeding sea eagles or something, or some local bird to come in for tourists, and it's a very small forested area, that might have an effect. But feeding, you know, a partridge in the Central Highlands of peninsular Malaysia, so it comes into the hotel, or putting up a sheet with a light on it at night to bring bugs in so that there are birds there in the morning. I mean, that is such a, if there's reasonable forest, that is such a minuscule effect on the population. You know, people get all bent out of shape about 2 or 3 individual birds. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You know, now if you're in a very limited area, that's a different story. But if you've managed to, you know, save a big chunk of forest, proportionally, that's nothing.
Yeah, perhaps, Brad. For me personally, I'm sort of on the middle path with regards to this. I don't have overly strong opinions on it. What I've just shared is actually what is just happening. So, like for the case of Langkawi, right? It's in the tourism brochures. It started in Langkawi. Then later, it sort of somebody must have gone there and said, "Hey, I got eagles in my site. Great idea. I'll replicate that." And now it is in Selangor as well. So I don't know in future if other operators will also, you know, replicate that. So assuming that from Langkawi, that spawned off whole other 10 other different sites across the country. So that will back to me, you know, my mind will wonder, is it going to be detrimental to the eagles there? You know, how is it detrimental? What the heck are they feeding them? Because I hear different things. Some say chicken skin, chicken parts, chicken offals. I don't know. For raptors that take fish, you know, you start lighting Kentucky Fried Chicken. How are you gonna? Is it gonna affect your biology? You know, nobody's really studies raptors here. So it's a tough cookie lah, in a way. You know, when you piggyback that as part of a tourism activity, susah lah, Fred, susah lah.
Susah.
So I have another good question here that might spur on some more conversation, but this was more a comment than anything else, but I was asked to share it to see what folks thought about it. But it was a comment about IBAs in Sabah, and that additional protections in the form of IBAs or Ramsar is not for us conservation-based folks. It feels more like it is for transient politicians.
Don't ask me to answer that.
I'll let Yap speak on IBAs.
Likely yes. I no, seriously, because I think where our experience go, and partly also my own experience, I see how sometimes IBAs are attractive to local politicians or decision makers, because it's something that they can understand very quickly. You know, there's a science behind it, thankfully. You know, it's not just say, oh, that's an important bird area, we'll put a stamp on it. No. So there's a criteria that it has to fulfill. So that's good. And then if there are other research that continues to build on it, that's great, because at some point, now all politicians have is a very short attention span. So they need to know things very fast. So IBA, KBA, whatever Robert want to call the landscape approach, give it a nifty title, you know, it sort of would have a stronger chance, at least in our opinion, a hook for them to kick the ball further together with government agencies behind it. So even if that politician goes bye-bye in the next election, or the same and a different fellow comes in, we do the same thing again. Our concept stands, our science behind it stands. So the only thing is we just need to interest all these decision makers to continue to kick the ball further. To give you an example, and also for local communities as well, so I've seen it sort of build pride, you know. So 2 examples I give you. One is we started raptor watching in Tanjung Tuan, one of our IBAs, a small promontory in the Straits of Malacca, shortest water crossing between Peninsular Malaysia and the island of Sumatra. So that area at one point was about to be or partly cut for development for more hotels in an area that's already saturated with hotels. So our guys who have been watching raptors there think, hey, a light bulb went up and says, why don't we do raptor watching, right? So they did. They experimented with a small tent that attracted quite a fair bit of public in its inception year. And MNS have been doing raptor watch ever since that time. It started in 1999. Yeah. So in 2000, I joined MNS. So they asked me to go organize the event. So anyway, we've been doing that for many, many years. And when I look back, you know, in retrospect, it takes 10 years for raptor watch to know, for people to know, for politicians to know that small promontory, please keep your hands off. This is very important for raptors. We have an event that attracts public, and during the event time, it benefits the local community. 10 years, just a simple tagline, 10 years. And the other example I give you is in Sarawak, in Bako Buntal Bay. You know, when during the process, when Sarawak Forestry wanted to get the feedback from the local communities about how do you feel about Bako Buntal Bay being nominated as a flyway site under the East Asia Flyway Partner. They bust in, to my surprise, 30 over community representatives, 30 different villages. So we presented, you know, why it's important, all that kind of thing. You know what's the question that they actually asked at the end? Everybody is supportive. The question that they asked was, Bako Buntal Bay is actually very not representative of my village that seems to be in your boundary, but not in the name. So to me, that was actually an interesting dilemma we were in, because the name Bako Buntal, the boundary that we drew obviously is bigger than the Bako Buntal, but we cannot put Bako Buntal Sejingkat Kampung Penampang, whatever the name, becomes very, very big. But that kind of reception that the local communities gave, you know, being supportive, having that kind of pride that, oh, it's going to be there. Hopefully, you know, we can help protect the birds and whatnot. That was a great example. So we need that kind of perhaps hook to get people excited about it, to get people to know about it, and hopefully to sort of brand it in their brains, so that, you know, they will continue to remain an important area and invest resources to do conservation there. For hornbills, to have this tagline, Malaysia has 10 hornbill species, it again takes more than 10 years. Okay. You scour the news before 2004 to see whether you can find the tagline, Malaysia has 10 hornbill species. You will not find it. After 2004, 2005, 2006, then they're starting to be more, they start to recognize more of this tagline. And Perak particular, because, you know, where I work, Belum Temenggong has all the 10 hornbill species. So we need that kind of tagline. You know, the science builds on it. We build on the science, but we need the tagline to engage differently with different stakeholders.
So I think the answer to the question is yes, IBAs is totally for political purposes.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Selling an idea.
Yes, Fred, you've captured it in less than 10 sentences. Thank you very much. So I should shut up now, actually, to let other people talk.
That was a great question that was happening in the chat earlier, and I just want to go back to it. And for Ravin, and I think it's actually between you and John, which was great. And I wanted to bring it forward because I thought it was a great conversation that people would appreciate. But John was saying that I assume that nests are limited in the secondary forests where you're doing boxes and restoration. Is there plenty of birds around that are unable to breed because of this limitation? And if so, where are they being sourced from?
So in Kinabatangan, we find that because hornbills are long-living birds, you see them around, but you're not seeing many of the young birds. That was one of the first signs that worried us. And then the other thing is we did an occupancy survey to try to get to estimate the proportion of sites that were occupied by trees with cavities. And we did find trees with cavities, but they were usually occurring in the smaller diameter trees. So it looks like Kinabatangan is a good place for smaller bodied hornbills, like the oriental pied hornbills, but it doesn't seem to have those larger cavities that were, that's more appropriate for the helmeted hornbills or rhinoceros hornbills. Yeah, did I get everything in that question? That's a long one.
Well,
Yeah, and I would ask John if he had any follow-up questions on that one.
Well, let's hear what Fred had to say.
Well, I was curious that you said that black hornbills, I assume there are black hornbills in the Kinabatangan.
Yes.
They're dirt common in plantations and places. And so I
never visited our boxes.
I
No
just
interest.
thought that was the easiest bird. Is there something about their nest that's hard to replicate?
No, I've been looking at the nests, like there's some in Marapo. Izrin has also showed us some nests that he's observing. They look similar, the cavity shape and, but I don't know. And it's very low occurring, the natural ones that Izrin found. It baffles me. And another thing that baffles me is white crown hornbill. This is a highly carnivorous bird. It has, plenty of bugs out there. There's oil palm plantations. You have beetles and all. But I can't see them. They're so rare now in Kinabatangan. So
And and does anybody know about their nesting, white crowns? Or are they just like other hornbills?
No, I've never seen a nest. That's why I think one of Yap's presentation, I was asking him, how does it look like? I believe you've seen them in Balum Temenggong. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had we have white crown nest in the landscape, but I think among the nine species of hornbill nest that we have seen and found, white crown is one of the hardest actually. It's very hard to see them.
Yeah.
And also actually hear them, not often. It's even harder to go and locate their nest. So even after so many years to date, we have only probably two or maybe at maximum 3. So from what we can see, the nest it's not so different from the smaller hornbills. But what is exactly the trigger that I think needs more digging But the fact that even sometimes they don't come back to the same nest to nest the following year makes it quite difficult and quite hard to have the opportunity to learn more. And in terms of actually detecting and occupancy, all that kind of thing, white crown hornbill is probably one of the rarest, along with wrinkled hornbill. So I assume right now, sorry.
So I was looking at this thesis by Lincoln in 1982, and he mentioned that white crown hornbills, the smaller bodied hornbill, would go into the caves and take swiftlet babies. And it's interesting because the swiftlet babies are also over harvested. I mean, they were taking the nest, right? And that population also went down. So I wonder if this species was particularly focused on this. So maybe it was affected when the swiftlets went down as well. I don't know.
Well,
Just
for areas in
thinking out loud.
Kinabatangan, yeah, for areas in Kinabatangan where you have caves and all that, maybe that's something which is interesting to see, whether it actually occurs or not. But in Belum Temenggor, you don't really have limestone. There's only one outcrop that is truly limestone. So what motivates them is still a great mystery. But interesting to point out that hornbills for white crown to take swiftlets and all that. Right now, even oriental pied is learning new tricks already, right? The edible nest swiftlets in edible nest swiftlet motels, they know where to go and start picking off all these yummy birds flying out.
Adaptable.
Yeah, and also in Ipoh, they have oriental pied exploiting the limestone limestone areas also as well as for nesting. I think simply because maybe in a housing area where you have limestones also as well, and also at the same time you have oriental pied. There's obviously not a lot of big tall trees that they would use lah. And plus, if the old gate design for the houses in the housing estate, it's not like those box pillar nest post box, so they can't use that as well. But they have been documented using that also. That is just mind blowing, in a way. Yeah, so they're smart creatures lah. But for white crown, I think where you work, where I work, I think anywhere else it's a definitely harder nut to crack lah.
Since we're talking about white, here's a little story. So we used to have problems with white crowns eating birds in our nets. So if you leave the nets on, the white crowns will come down and eat the birds in the nets.
What's the problem? We want to study white crown. It's okay. We'll sacrifice the small fellas.
Yeah, exactly. Put up a net.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Where was this spread?
Well, that was in 1982 near Denham Valley. This one time that we had this problem. So.
In Taman Negara, when I was catching bats, I had owls next to my bat. Okay, I had Scops owl next to my bat. So if you want to catch Scops owl, find a place where you have bats, and then they go. You catch your bats, but at the same time you get bonus Scops owl. So, and also a civet in another area in Taman Negara.
I'm not going to comment on this conversation.
I was just curious if there was anybody else from the any participants that had any questions.
Yeah, please. Yeah, we'd love to hear.
It feels like a great living room conversation. I just wanted to make sure that if participants had any questions, that they felt open to.
Yeah, we need coffee.
Can you hear me?
Oh no.
You sound like Darth Vader again, Robert.
Yeah. You turn Star Wars again. Maybe in out again and see, or maybe your mic.
No.
Same. Let's do the same.
Well, you fixed it last night by going out and coming back, I think. So you might have to do that. It must get old and tired as it sits there all this.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
What'd you
Can you
do?
hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay,
Yes.
good. I have a question for John about your internship program. Just want to ask whether the interns, are they paid or become self-funded?
Well, self-funded, that's interesting. So ideally we provide housing and a living stipend. So they are paid $750 a month and given housing. So it's certainly, they're not making money, but I think that they can live. What we generally try to do is get that funding. So I was mentioning, the U.S. Forest Service international programs, and I've been actually talking to them about you guys. Greg Butcher and the Wings Across the Americas program is who I work with there. They fund our international interns based on the connectivity of our birds to Western Mexico and Central America. I'm working right now with the Caribbean, Birds Caribbean. We've done some work in Birds Caribbean, and that we're interested in going back and doing some more workshops in Birds Caribbean. We got a neotropical migratory bird funding to fund those interns to come. So ideally, we don't want to put it on them. There's also visa costs and other kinds of things, and their travel costs. So often the students are responsible for travel, but we pay them once they get here. But ideally, we raise the money for all of that, right? But it's a collaborative effort between the partnering countries. But certainly we don't feed them. We don't have one of those kind of field stations, even though like I got, you know, my first field work, we had cooks and all that great stuff, but that's not our field station. So yeah, for them to sustain themselves, the expenses are travel, the visa costs, mostly in country, we cover with our collaboration with Oregon State University, those visa costs. And then the stipend, and we offer the housing and the vehicles. I mean, they travel hundreds of miles a week back and forth. So that's one of the pieces of the sustainability, is to make sure that they don't come out worse off financially than they were coming in.
So it's possible for someone from Sabah to apply to participate in one of these programs.
It is possible for somebody from Sabah to apply, but I think that part of what we should start thinking about, I'm not sure whether my Forest Service money would pay for that. And that's why I was asking whether Forest Service international programs, or do you work with the United States Forest Service at all there?
No. Oh.
And that's what I was asking them. So if we can make that connection with the funding source, that would be great. But typically Environment Canada are looking for us to build capacities where their birds winter. So I think that's something that when we all get back together, Oregon State and you guys and us, we should brainstorm if this is a model we want to employ, how we would fund it.
I've got another question. In one of your slides, you showed, I think, was a publication called the State of the Birds. Is that the publication that you publish?
Yeah, so the there's an organization called the North American Bird Conservation Initiative, and we put out almost annually, excuse me, almost annually a State of the Birds report. And every 4 or 5 years, it gives a broad indication of North American bird populations. And then in between those reports, we'll focus on opportunities for state agencies to do things for birds, or private lands to do things for birds. This was a concept originally, I believe, conceived by the British. And they were doing a State of the Birds report, almost as an economic, like another well-being index. I know there's a lot of countries around the world that do human well-being indices, and certainly bird population sustainability would be one that would fit into something like that. So if you look up State of the Birds, NABCI, NABCI, here I'll actually put the link in the chat. You can see the different State of the Birds reports, sometimes themed, sometimes just broad scaled indices. This year, of course, our State of the Birds is going to focus on the new administration here and opportunities under infrastructure to do good things for birds in North America. I hope I didn't just give something away. Don't anybody tell anybody I said that. That's might still be.
Just to add on to John, I think there's publication called State of the Birds Anywhere, like the State of the Birds of the World, published by BirdLife, and there's many State of the Birds Nigeria, State of the Birds Fiji, States of the Bird Taiwan, and all that. All that just takes an example of the road that has been crafted. I think it is my dying wish to see in Malaysia come out with a similar report like this. If it's not for Malaysia, if Sabah makes it part of its, that kind of biodiversity report once every 5 years, that would actually be quite awesome also as well, within the framework of whatever you want to do in bird conservation. So that is like one of the highlights of the bird conservation framework, publishing a very specific State of the Birds Sabah, for example. Anyway, that aside, I wanted to ask John, because if you train people to ban birds in Sabah, right? So if they've gone through the program, then I assume that at the end of the program they get their wings chopped. You are certified. recognized. But there's also standards in Australia. There's also standards in Europe. Would the American one be recognized by Australia and also Europe? I mean, honest question, I don't know. I just know that there are banding standards and councils and all that.
So the council, the North American Banding Council, I want to be very clear, the certification is kind of like a certificate. It's not a banding license. It's not a banding permit. It's not required by the United States Banding Lab for a banding permit, but the banding lab looks on it favorably. We find that in Latin America, the certification seems to mean a lot for our students who go back down there, because there aren't the North American bird banding program of the United States and Canada is very well developed, and as you get into Mexico and Central America, their bird banding programs are not as codified. So we find that their certifications are much more meaningful for those students there. So what the North American Banding Council has done in its materials and its manuals is it's taken information from around the world to come up with the best practices for bird banding in general in those things. So I would imagine, and I would love to know, but we certainly, a while ago we started to work on when the bird banding lab here was doing a little better financially and was open to facilitating a Western Hemisphere bird banding program. We had the ringers from Italy and England and other places coming to talk with us about our certificate, I think more important is the curriculum and the manuals than the certification. But I do find that certification holds weight outside. I mean, it holds weight inside the country as far as if I'm going to go try to get a banding permit, the banding lab's going to see that I'm certified, and that's going to be a good thing. But it definitely seems to hold weight out of the country with our international partners more. I think, especially when you get to the training level, but that's one of the things we're starting to think about this as an organization. Would a certification from Klamath Bird Observatory be as valuable as a certification from the North American Banding Council? Probably not, but I think our training programs are. So I think that if we send people out that are certified for banding, but they know they've been a part of our training programs, if you look at those training programs that we've done, however many I listed, most of those are now taught by our students. And like, I'll go if I'm lucky and stand around, right? And get to give a little talk here and a little talk there. We'd much rather that presentation and the whole workshop being offered by more local people.
There's a question from the one of the participants. I just want to make sure that we get this one answered. They would love to know more about the Bornean peacock pheasant status in Sabah that hasn't been seen in Sabah's forest, and they had managed to see it in Kalimantan in 2014. And if you all think that a breeding program would be possible here in Sabah.
I can't comment on this.
I don't think any of us would know.
And that's an
I don't
okay
know,
answer.
Robert, if you have, if Robert has anything.
No, I'm not really a bird expert, so I know I didn't know that it's not been seen for so long. But what's the stand of MNS as far as captive breeding is concerned for endangered species? Does MNS have a stand on that? Oh,
that's quite a big question to ask, actually. I would say we don't have a specific policy or stand in terms of captive breeding birds. We were talking about birds for now, but MNS was involved in captive breeding in one way also in many years ago in KS, Kuala Selangor Nature Park, where we took milky stocks. We worked with Zoo Negara, took milky stocks to put in temporary aviaries in the park itself to eventually be released. But the long and short of it, that's we learned valuable lessons in that if you do not have or if if you don't have long-term resources to support the program and expertise, that will obviously impact the project as well. But I think in terms of captive breeding, there is a space and purpose for it in conservation. I think for whatever species, if in the wild, it's going to be, the population is low to the point that it's not going to be viable anymore. And if it's in the zoo or bird parks, zoological parks, bird parks, they have this kind of breeding program, then I think if the intention is to repopulate the wild population, then perhaps it is important. But it also begs the question, you captive breed to release, then you must make sure that the habitat is still there for the birds lah. If not, then what's the point of releasing it? There's no more habitat. So the objective of what you want to do with captive breeding is equally important, if not more important, before you even start to do captive breeding lah, because it is going to be very costly. Just ask the zoo and bird parks. I'm quite sure they can give you the figures.
Yeah, that's definitely a question for zoos, and I'm sure they could easily breed these. Well, I'm quite confident they could breed these birds. They already are in captivity, and it is something to be considered, but it's a little bit outside of our expertise.
Yeah, if you breed the bird and then you release it into habitat, and then people know you release it, then people go and hunt the chicken. That's the end of your captive breeding program, also, isn't it? So the captive breeding program, you gotta think it through a bit lah, in a sense. But having said that, it is a tool. It has a place in conservation lah.
Great. Well, thank you.
You wanna breed pheasants, Robert?
Well, I wouldn't mind.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful questions from the participants. And I just want to thank all of our panelists, John, Robert, Fred, Ravin. Yup, and Matt is not here tonight. And I also want to thank Michelle for being our tech person behind the scenes, and also for her great partnership in helping put this together, and Oregon State University, whose wonderful tech system was able to make tonight possible. So thanks to all of you, and also thanks to the U.S. Embassy for supporting this grant and these great workshops. And there'll be more to come. So we will stay tuned, I guess, for a lot more to come. We're going to be having one on fisheries conservation and management. There'll be one on climate change and urban wildlife. And then there'll be an additional one looking at kind of large landscape scale initiatives across Sabah, and bringing different groups together to share information and knowledge. So really excited about all of those. And we will be advertising them, as will the U.S. Embassy and our partners. And there's a lot of collaboration to happen. And I'm really excited about the next steps and working towards a comprehensive bird conservation plan for Sabah. So thank you so much and Robert, I hope you're excited.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
No, really great information. And what's that?
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And just for the participants, we will be sending out a follow-up email, and it will have a link to the recording from last night, and there will also be a link to the recording from tonight. And if there's any additional information, or you want to connect with any of the speakers from last night or tonight, happy to connect you. And their presentations will be available as well. So just let us know if you need any of those.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much, everybody. Wonderful presentations and very informative. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for US of spending your evening with us. I know y'all have families, and so really appreciate your time. And for those of you in Sabah, good morning, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.